A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support.
It started with the usual dull routine of waiting for luggage at the carousel, a repetitive monotony that I had perfected over years of travel for my job. But on that evening, the dull thrum of the conveyor belt only added a rhythm to my growing impatience. My name is Eric, 33, an IT consultant, usually a face in the crowd, but that night, I became the guy whose life took a peculiar turn in a chillingly mundane setting. The airport was crowded, a sea of travelers as tired and bleary-eyed as I was. My eyes began to droop, lulled by the hypnotic drone of people's banal conversations and the mechanical hum of the moving baggage. Then, I noticed a bag, black, nondescript, similar to mine but not quite the same. It was like glimpsing a parallel version of a familiar face, with just enough differences to signal something was off. A small streak of red ran down its side, easily missed if you weren't squinting through exhaustion. But I was done waiting. I was a traveler well overdue to be home. Rationalizing that my mind, fogged by fatigue, could easily play tricks on me, I caught the handle of the bag and headed for the exit. My fingers tightened around the handle, a subconscious recognition that lingered unsettlingly in my gut. It was heavier than expected. The straps dug sharply into my palm, but I dismissed it, attributing it to the weight of the various chargers, travel books, and whatnot I frequently overpacked. As I left the airport, the air outside felt unusually clammy, the kind of humid chill that gnaws subtly on your spine. I thought it was just the change in climate. The taxi ride was uneventful, though I did feel an inexplicable urge to glance at the trunk where the bag lay. I attributed this to stress and the sense of having forgotten something important only to realize it would suffuse into a larger dread as the night wore on. The cab dropped me off, and I lugged the bag up the stairs with a huff, hearing something rattle inside eerily in contrast to the expected muffled thuds of clothing. Once in the safe familiarity of my living room, the apartment quiet except for the buzzing neon sign outside my window, the need to solve this minor mystery overcame me. I unzipped the bag and the rank scent of old metal, like rust mixed with something coppery, hit me before I even had the chance to look inside. The light over my kitchen table flickered, something else for the to-fix list, casting brief shadows as I fully opened the bag, spilling its contents onto the floor. Teeth. Hundreds of them. All shapes and sizes, molars, canines, and incisors tumbled forth, clattering onto the hardwood with a sickening, surreal sound like quicksilver rain. What in the ever-loving? My brain reeled, detaching from the scenario, trying to rationalize it as some prank or art installation, anything but the primal horror it invoked. My instinct was to scoop them back up, dump them, pretend it never happened, but I couldn't touch them. They glistened ominously in the bleak light. Among them was a notebook, a few loose papers tucked in, the only other item in the bag. With trembling hands, I reached for it, each movement a conscious effort against rising panic. Inside, scrawled in an illegible hand, were notes, diary entries maybe, and the single name Elise repeated, intertwined with paranoid ramblings facing madness, shadowy figures following, and teeth, always the teeth. Each page felt damp, as if tears or something more sinister had stained them. My hands shook as I read about teeth for protection, speeches in fear and reverence, events I couldn't fully understand. The descent into chaos was gradual yet inevitable as the narrative etched onto each page darkened, one entry detailing a dream of drowning in oceans of teeth, another raving that the teeth had once been inside all who had wronged Elise. Panic simmered into a clandestine terror that began whispering suggestions to my mind. If the bag wasn't mine, then whose would want it back? I imagined the door would open any moment, someone standing there demanding their terrible cargo. Thoughts spiraled into vivid fears of some cult-like upheaval at my doorstep, cloaked figures with missing teeth and obscured faces confronting my possession of their relic. The night stretched, days passing in worried isolation, each sound ominous, each glance out the window screen for followers. I became a prisoner of my own home, clinging to normality. Sleep came in jagged rifts, memories of ghosts with vivid smiles mocking my waking moments. A week passed, and food deliveries began frowning upon the lack of customers as I refused to even face the door. Meanwhile, curiosity weathered reluctance, leading me back to the notes, deciphering a life not mine, yet now unwelcome, inextricable from my own. At last, anonymity turned to investigation. I found myself at a library, poring over records, an obsession curdling within. Elise. She wasn't real in the traditional sense, but a vast tapestry of small-town warnings and urban legends thread her story. Each place I sought her out, a collective memory of disappeared girls and smiling strangers haunted my inquiries, each leading to dead ends or further speculation. Always, relationships severed, Tales of switches flipped and families torn by unspoken secrets leading back to the unexplainable dental treasures stored so questioningly by a tired IT consultant. So here I stand, writing this missive, desperate for resolution. Each entry an attempt to unravel what led my flight path to a bag full of horror. Whether misguided mix-up or fated encounter, I'm left dissecting a life not lived, yet wholly entwined with unknown sorrow. As I share this, dedicated whispers of conjecture to discover truth or simply cathartic in fear, the bag still waits. It's nestled in my storage, teeth and book untouched since that fateful day. My nights are interrupted by the echoes of that hideous cascade. All I can offer is a tale, sordid as it is, haunting, and a warning cloaked in puzzlement and shadows of misplaced belongings. Would you abandon it, forget it? Or has this gift, knowingly claimed unwittingly adored, an object worthy of lore, marked me for some unseeable fate where truth awaits amidst grinning ivory hosts? I've always considered myself a rational person, never one to delve too deeply into the supernatural. However, the past few weeks have shaken the foundations of my reality and my skepticism. It all began when I received an old, dusty lamp in the mail, an anonymous gift delivered without a return address. Giggles of excitement escaped me as I polished the lamp as a joke, whispers of childhood fantasies dancing through my mind. To my utter shock, a swirling cloud of darkness erupted, forming into a figure, a genie, its presence somehow both chilling and mesmerizing. Now, what I found strange was the genie didn't offer me wishes. Instead, it simply laughed, a low, reverberating sound that seemed to echo through my bones. Then it vanished just as quickly as it appeared, leaving me with an unsettling sense of dread. A week later, as I was trying to dismiss the lamp incident as a dream or hallucination, my phone rang. It was from an unknown number, and the voice on the other end was a lisping whisper, repeating the phrase, "The wish has been made." Goosebumps prickled my skin, but I had no idea what the message meant until strange things began to happen. It started subtly, doors that I knew I had locked left swinging open, items disappearing only to reappear in odd places. Soon, though, the occurrences escalated. I'd wake up to find strange symbols drawn on my walls, written in what appeared to be my own blood, though I had no injuries. Paranoia crept into every corner of my mind as I began to feel eyes constantly watching me. I started seeing shadowy figures in my peripheral vision, but whenever I turned my head, they vanished. One night, my reflection in the mirror didn't mimic my movements, instead, it grinned widely, its eyes alight with a sinister gleam that wasn't my own. Desperate for answers, I trawled the internet for any hint, any clue, or similar stories. Eventually, in a sketchy forum, I found an obscure thread, an ancient lore describing how genies could not just grant wishes, but inversely, could fulfill the darkest desires of others upon us. Someone had indeed made a wish for my demise. Sleep-deprived and terrified, I sought help from a so-called paranormal expert. He advised me to find the wisher soon, for as long as the wish remained unfulfilled, I'd be hunted relentlessly by misfortune. He described a ritual to trace back the curse's origin, a ceremony as baffling as it was terrifying. With no other options, I followed his instructions, using the accursed lamp, candles, and the blood tempo of a midnight heartbeat. As I performed the ritual, the world flickered, and I found myself in a void, standing before the genie, its eyes glowing with malevolent amusement. "Who wished for my death?" I demanded. The genie cackled, its voice resonating like a crypt song, a soul with a heart full of envy and a mind touched by madness. The scene shifted, and before me appeared an acquaintance from college, someone I barely remembered, a person whose name I had to strain to recall, Ben, a guy I'd helped occasionally with assignments. His life had fallen apart after college, jobs fretted away, relationships splintered, envy fermented and twisted into hate. He had found the lamp years prior, used his wish, and the genie had waited patiently for the chance to execute this dark desire. Heart pounding, I realized I needed to confront Ben. Tracking him down was surprisingly easy, given his down-and-out public social media cries for validation and vengeance. Cornering him in his shabby apartment, I revealed everything, the genie's existence, the curse, and his damning wish. His eyes widened, horror mingling with guilt as he broke down, admitting he'd wished it in a moment of despair, thinking it an impossible landmark of his hate. Ben and I returned to my place. I insisted he needed to rescind the wish. In a final standoff with the ethereal presence, Ben fell to his knees, weeping, pleading for the genie to revoke his wish. I watched as the air shimmered, the room darkened, and finally, after an agonizing pause, the genie acquiesced with a grudging whisper that felt like a storm receding. The sinister occurrences around me ceased immediately. The relief was palpable, the weight of doom lifted. If I learned anything, it's that darkness lurks not in the shadows cast by the lamp's light but in the shadows of human hearts. Even the playful notion of wish fulfillment can become a nightmare when tainted by envy. Now, as I stare at the cursed lamp sealed in a concrete block, soon to be sunk into the sea, I decide to break my rule and share what happened. Because everyone has secrets they wish they could have answered, but some secrets are better left buried. Alright, brace yourselves because what I'm about to confess might send a chill down your spine, especially if you've ever indulged in fast food chicken nuggets. Let me take you back a few years to when I worked the late-night shift at our local fast food joint. I wasn't just another teenager killing time and hunting for booze money, I had a purpose. I did something that most of you might consider a blessing, perhaps even a hit of pure luck, a gift from the nugget gods. But behind those cheeky extra McNuggets, there was something darker. It started innocently. I was a bored high schooler, feeling invisible under those greasy fluorescent lights, just another pawn in the grind of minimum wage. I started adding an extra McNugget to random orders because, hell, why not? It wasn't coming out of my check, and the delight it brought to unsuspecting customers was a drug in itself. But what began as petty rebellion morphed into something I never anticipated. One particularly slow night, close to the graveyard shift, I noticed a pattern: strangers who came in looking normal, like weary travelers, ordinary parents with screaming kids, or that loner teen with hooded eyes. Once they got those extraordinary meals, they'd return, not always the next night or the next week, but eventually, with a glow in their eyes that I recognized. We exchanged wordless smiles, a silent understanding, as if they knew that someone had handpicked them, made their lives incrementally, digestively happier. With time, these customers became familiar, their lives somehow intertwined with mine. What I didn't realize was that they weren't just coming back for the tantalizing chance of an extra nugget, they returned because they were becoming addicted to something far darker than fast food. Beneath the surface, those McNuggets carried a shadowy secret I was oblivious to. Our food shipment had changed suppliers without warning, and nothing was quite as it seemed. Not until one night, when a shadow cloaked the counter, a face so unsettlingly familiar it made my stomach curl. He leaned in, reeking of something sour and mossy, like forgotten graves. Without saying much, except for a casual "Hey kid, nice night for extras, huh?" I realized he saw through the gimmick, straight to the darkness nesting beneath fryers and sizzling grease traps. His eyes were like shards of coal, almost void of life, yet pulsating with something sinister. The grin he shot me felt omnipotent, as if crowning him the ringmaster of my puppet show. For weeks after that encounter, my nights warped into something not of time but of tension. Customers continued to come, but I noticed how they appeared different, not just happy, but eerily euphoric, their faces flushed yet skin taut over bones, eyes bulging like they've gazed into the abyss and returned with a taste that can never be satisfied without my intervention. Their increased frequency and fervor began to terrify me. They came during odd hours, restlessly peering through glass panes long after closing. One by one, they dripped in, some begging, some threatening, until it was clear that the extra McNugget trick had hooked them. However, it was the aftermath that sparked my dread. A string of reports on the news about missing persons overlapped disturbingly with my list of frequenters. The most unsettling part? Each report mentioned an unnatural obsession with fast food chicken nuggets just before their disappearance. Eventually, those reports dwindled, leaving a dark void in public discourse, and I could almost hear that sinister melody playing somewhere in the shadows, a hymn only I seemed to tune into. It was as if my little act of unauthorized generosity had connected these souls to me, and something far beyond me. I tried quitting multiple times, but the hold it had on me, and them, was inexplicable. Like a web, sticky and resilient, every other job attempt collapsed the moment a person walked in holding a crumpled nugget box, eyes locked onto mine like they'd wandered through galaxies just to find the creator of their boundless longing. Sometimes I'd wake at night drenched in sweat, a ghostly whisper haunting my dreams, "Feed us." I'd see flashes of all those faces, including the ones that stopped returning, like flickering shades in a nightmare carnival, forever hungry, forever searching. As time and courage betrayed me, stacking the odds against breaking free, I became aware that the greasy little packets weighed more than just processed chicken. They bore cravings, desires, and stories of lives slipping away. The last shift I worked, that strange man returned, strikingly unchanged as if time bypassed him. He leaned across the counter, those eyes promising a twilight of peace, or the complete absence thereof. "You were chosen," he murmured, "to feed souls beyond your world." Then he slid a nugget towards me, a maddening echo of those I'd once given out like candies. Only now, The gesture felt final, a haunting cape swirled around my fading sanity. That encounter sealed it for me. I've stayed on the move since, working nights at random gas stations, diners, anywhere those familiar faces can't find me. But even there, the allure trails like an insidious shadow. No matter how far I run, echoes of crackling fryers, oily vats, and greedy munching haunt my reality. Sometimes, just sometimes, I'll catch someone casting a veiled look my way in another rundown diner at 3 a.m., always with that same insatiable hunger in their eyes. And I know they were looking for something I inadvertently promised them years ago. But now, it's a curse I can't escape. So next time you find an extra nugget in your box, enjoy it cautiously. After all, you never really know who's behind the fryer or what dark secret they've unwillingly passed to you. It all started one chilly Friday night, the kind that coaxes you indoors with the promise of warm company and hearty laughter. My friend Sarah had invited me over for a small dinner gathering with her fiancé, Mark, and a couple of other close acquaintances. An opportunity to unwind, she had said, and I looked forward to it, eager to escape the mundane routine of daily life. As I arrived, the house felt inviting with its glowing candles and the aroma of roasted garlic wafting from the kitchen. The dining room was set with charming imperfections that revealed intimate touches, a wine stain on the tablecloth, mismatched silverware, and a bouquet of wildflowers in a tiny, chipped vase. It felt lived in, genuine. We exchanged pleasantries, settled into the coziness of mismatched chairs, and poured ourselves generous glasses of wine as light banter filled the air. Between sips, we shared anecdotes and old jokes that lingered like pleasant echoes, adding warmth to the space. The evening flowed seamlessly until Mark suggested playing a game, something he called Empathy Circle. Intrigued and with the wine loosening our inhibitions, we agreed, imagining it to be a kind of amicable confession session. He explained the rules: you write down a fear or secret on a piece of paper, fold it, and place it in a bowl. One by one, a paper is chosen, read aloud, and the group offers support and insights without judgment. Innocuous enough, it seemed, and amidst giggles and conspiratorial glances, we all scribbled our deepest anxieties. As the first slip was opened, a nervous energy settled over us like a mist, both thrilling and slightly ominous. "I'm afraid of being forgotten," read Sarah, her voice tender. We murmured empathetic words, sharing stories of how memory connects us. The game progressed with confessions of fear of failure, frets over losing loved ones, and anxiety about the future. Each was met with warmth and understanding until Mark picked up the last note. His fingers paused over the crumpled slip, and I noticed a shadow cross his face. "There's someone in the basement," he read, his voice tight, eyes inadvertently flicking to Sarah. Laughter bubbled up nervously as we tried to guess who among us was playing a prank, yet no one claimed it. A beat of silence hung in the air, creeping up on us with its strange weight, before Mark laughed it off as some odd joke. But something in the flicker of his eyes was growing hard and unresolved. We moved on, or tried to, brushing away the unsettling suggestion as the night deepened. Yet, a peculiar sense of unease lingered, a chill that stood in direct contrast to the evening's earlier warmth. As casual conversation resumed, I found my eyes involuntarily drawn to the basement door, its knotted wooden surface suddenly more menacing, as if holding stories I was not meant to hear. Trying to shake off the disturbed feeling, I poured myself another glass of wine, but the fear lingered, unwelcome and insistent. It wasn't just whisper-soft suggestions of unease that hung in the air, it was the sense that something was observing, something that had slipped into our world unnoticed, quietly seated among us. Despite us changing the subject, despite the laughter trying to pierce the odd gravity seeping into the room, I noticed our eyes constantly, furtively flicking to the basement door, drawn to it as if by some magnetic force. Then, for some reason, the conversation stopped, as if on cue. The chatter died a stumbling death, and in that echoing silence, we heard it, an unmistakable thud from below. My heart dropped to the soles of my feet, echoed by the collective holding of breath. Mark's presence at the head of the table suddenly seemed remote, like an anchor snapping free from its moorings. Sarah's face had drained to an ashen pallor, eyes wide but silent, seeing shadows I could not perceive. Someone among us chuckled nervously, suggesting it was perhaps the house's old pipes or foundation settling, but no one truly believed it. Mark's gaze locked with Sarah's, communicating everything and nothing in a microsecond intimate exchange. Slowly, he stood, trying to feign control, his voice calm as he suggested that he go check alone. Instinct protested, something primordial within me voiced that no, it was unwise to let him face what lurked beneath us alone. And yet, lurid curiosity propelled us all to stand and follow him, irrational camaraderie binding us together against the encroaching dark. Reaching the basement door, Mark hesitated, hand trembling on the handle, and with a deep breath, flung it open. Shadows pulled at the bottom of the stairs, and the light switch flickered reluctantly to life, illuminating the contours of a space cluttered with relics of life, a forgotten tricycle, boxes marked in faded Sharpie, a half-assembled treadmill. Ordinary, also comfortingly ordinary. Tentatively, we descended, each step creaking underfoot with conspiratorial whispers. I held my breath, expecting some grotesque apparition to unfold itself from the gathering twilight, but there was nothing, only the basement clamoring with its odd normalcy. Reassured or resigned, we laughed nervously at our irrational fear, at the way shadows can twist the mind's fabric into knots of absurd fantasies. We returned to the living room, where the air felt lighter but fatigued. Someone proposed dessert, and the normalcy of it tasted sweet on my tongue until the power flickered and every light sputtered out, plunging us into a thick, palpable darkness born of void and fear. There was a murmur, a ripple through the group like shockwave. Then, a voice spoke from the darkness, not one of ours, raw and rasping like stone on glass. It drew a breath that sounded wet and cavernous, a subterranean echo of torment we hadn't fathomed, and said simply, "You found me." Panic rose with tangible panic, like a tide ruptured free of its dam, and my heart surged into a loud, hammering chaos. Someone screamed, maybe it was Sarah, and chaos erupted, bodies scrambling for doors, limbs crashing into furniture, the air thick with the acrid scent of fear. As light crashed back into the room, our eyes groped around, searching for the source of horror, every crevice scrutinized, but those shadows had retreated and folded themselves into the comforting confines of familiar things. The whispers were gone, silence sealing their abrupt exit. We stood silently, breath hitching, unity frail but unbroken as the real was swept beneath an oppressive eye of unexplainable dread. Perhaps it had been orchestrated within minds oversteeped in fear, perhaps it was the unwelcome remnants of some forgotten occupant now angered by our intrusion. I thought of the note again, the warning, "There's someone in the basement," and my skin flushed cold. We never did find explanation or reason that satisfied the betrayal edged into reality in that moment. Windows were checked, locks bolted, lights left burning through the remainder of the tormented night. Surrounded by friends, yet each of us bore the chill anchor of isolation, understanding that parts of ourselves had crossed into shadows we'd never entirely withdraw from, imprint etched indelibly on the map of our shared resilience. No one mentioned the note again, nor the presence we had glimpsed with the heart rather than the eyes. In the harsh light of morning, uneasy smiles and goodbyes held the unspoken pact of becoming regardful of the unearthly borders never again to be disrupted, boundaries where reality thins and something watches with eyes of terrible yearning. As I left, I couldn't shake the ominous feeling of having dined with a party much larger than we had anticipated, and the certainty of knowing it was not a presence that would easily let go. We had been cast adrift from safety, transient waves of uncertainty guiding our way back to mundane lives where every basement door inevitably held tales best left untold. The first thing you need to know is that my sister, Jenna, has always been a little different. Not in a bad way, just different. Even as kids, she had her head in the clouds, turning cardboard boxes into spaceships and believing her teddy bears spoke to her at night. I always thought she'd grow out of it, maybe chalk it up to a vivid imagination. But then, Jenna became pregnant. She was over the moon, lining up doll-sized clothes even before she started to show, naming her little one long before the ultrasound could confirm its gender. No one questioned her excitement or her meticulous preparation. After all, impending parenthood does funny things to people. Things took a turn when she started talking about the light. Jenna babbled endlessly about waking up in a glow that seemed to emanate from nowhere, surrounding her belly in a soft, pulsating warmth. She insisted it was a sign that her baby was special, destined for something beyond our mundane comprehension. I dismissed it as New Age mumbo-jumbo, the sort that expects you to align crystals to balance chakras. Then she invited me to her home, a small cottage nestled away on the edge of town, claiming she wanted me to meet her miracle. Her intensity almost deterred me, but family obligations won out, and curiosity nudged me forward. The indoors was fouler than I'd imagined, all windows sealed shut, air thick with incense and strange herbs, paintings of celestial phenomena cluttering the walls. Jenna floated about the place like someone possessed, whispering lullabies to her belly, urging it to glow for Auntie. She led me to the nursery where the atmosphere seemed to shift, an odd, oppressive heaviness settling over the room. In the crib, instead of the soft crib cushions and fluffy toys you'd expect, lay a jumbled mass of what looked like wires, slowly undulating as if breathing. It took a moment before I realized, the thing was emitting a ceaseless, Soft hum. Isn't he beautiful? Jenna beamed with maternal pride, her eyes glazed with something that wasn't entirely sane. My mouth went dry. At first, I thought it was some art project, an elaborate joke, but the reverence in her voice chilled me to the bone. It's not a real baby, I blurted out, horror gripping me, the moment of clarity ripping through the cocoon of unreality. Instantly, Jenna's face darkened, and her pupils seemed to swallow her irises. She accused me of jealousy, of failing to understand and appreciate the miracle she'd been chosen to carry. Nights became restless for me after that, hours haunted by the drone-like cannulation of circuits and a light that danced beneath my eyelids whenever they slid shut. Something was terribly wrong, clawing at the fringes of my consciousness. I returned, hunting for answers, half believing that I might find a logical explanation. Jenna's welcoming demeanor had soured. I was an outsider, a skeptic, someone trying to put out the light of her child's brilliance. Despite her protests, I inspected her home further, driven by an unseen force, stumbling across drawings that seemed to flicker and pulse, tracing the edges of what looked like machinery-exploded diagrams. My heart pounded erratically. The schematics were disturbingly detailed, suggesting much more than a child's game. Desperately, I sought help from friends and professionals, but they laughed off my concern, dismissing Jenna's obsession as eccentricity and my recounting as someone in need of a little less coffee. Determined, I clandestinely filmed our next interaction, needing evidence, something more than my words could convey. As my phone captured her jubilation, the room grew steadily brighter and my device began to overheat bizarrely, the screen flickering before blacking out entirely. Something in that nursery violated common sense, and being near it filled me with both dread and unnamable awe. "She has plans for us," Jenna kept repeating, rocking on her heels, her hands tracing signals into the fabric of reality I couldn't decipher. The members of an online forum I frequented were the only ones who seemed to take me seriously. They talked of ancient machines, spectral energies, cycles of rebirth, intertwining biology and technology, but it felt so abstract. On a whim, a fellow member offered to connect me with a friend into unraveling the unseen. This contact, when approached, seemed more intrigued than alarmed, offering his expertise for nearly nothing, but making me promise to keep an open mind to the impossible. The day he was to arrive, the sky erupted in a tempest of savage colors, as if some cosmic entity cracked an eye open briefly upon our corner of the world. We entered, he instinctively armed with devices I struggled to understand, and found Jenna cradling the mechanical bundle, as if it were flesh and blood. A single touch from him to the cradle and everything went black, not just the absence of light but a total, enveloping void. In that suffocating darkness, I couldn't tell where I ended and nothingness began. Whispers unlike any sound I'd heard filled the space between heartbeats. The pressure mounted until I thought I might shatter, and then daylight reasserted itself as though nothing had happened. The contraption now lay in dereliction, Jenna sobbing, a hollow ringing resonating through the cottage like a death knell. My contact assured us we'd collapsed a potentiality, a hybrid of intent and incident, one lingering too long between our world and wherever it emanated. Emerging, we found the town caught in a hushed awe. Many claimed they felt the earth shift, that the skies briefly wept a new kind of rain, one that left them feeling more alive, if not quite whole. Did we save Jenna and her child? The reality replayed in my mind constantly tore at me with unfinished threads, the knowledge that explore dimensions unseen often require a sacrifice not willingly given. Jenna doesn't speak of it, her mind seems to exist in a wrapped state, a tapestry reknitted where holes remain between the stitches. The incidents became folklore, as stories like these often do, but I watched from the periphery as small electrical anomalies began to appear, flocks of birds circling areas devoid of electronic noise, and wondered if something within the cracking tether to our reality had left its echo. Possibly an innocuous whisper long after the scream. Though it's quiet now, I dare not turn my back, refusing to see another glimmer lurking or confront shadows that would dare take form. So, tell me, does that make me the asshole? For trying to save my sister from something she didn't know she invited in, or for telling her cold truth that day? Perhaps the greatest truth is knowing how little we truly understand. A couple of months ago, I was at this office party, nursing a sad little drink at the corner of the room, trying to get my social bearings straight, when my colleague Linda, ever radiant and glowing, walked up to me with her expansive bump leading the way. With each gesture, every mention of her pregnancy, she was an epitome of excitement and naivety about the parenthood journey. We exchanged pleasantries and our conversation inevitably veered towards her impending motherhood. It was during this chat that Linda, with all the innocence and misunderstanding of what lies in her near future, equated her forthcoming experience to raising puppies. She laughed it off, said something along the lines of how chasing her puppy around the house had provided all the training she would need. Her enthusiasm was so contagious and so very blind to what lay ahead. The party continued, the night stretched on, and I swallowed down the instinctive urge to warn her. Who was I to quash her blissful ignorance, or open the Pandora's box of impending sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and the all-consuming anxiety of ensuring your tiny human just stays alive? A dark thought flashed, that curious intersections of feelings. Was it mine to say that raising a baby was far more than any sleepless nights guarding puppies through a bout of worms? I said nothing, not wanting to bear the burden of being the so-called asshole, ruining moments of joy with my well-informed prophecies that stemmed from own parenting experience riddled with chaos. The party ended, and I went home, still pondering if it had been wrong to withhold a bundle of truth in favor of administering comfort. Months passed, and my own life continued. I humored myself by imagining Linda's imminent reality check as she tackled the depths of early motherhood. However, the night of reckoning arrived sooner than expected. An emergency group text at 2:36 a.m., it was Linda's husband, frazzled and desperate. Linda's water had broken. Soon after, pictures flooded in, of a red-faced, screaming tiny human paired with exhausted faces of new parents trying desperately to conjure smiles through a haze of fatigue and euphoria. Days blurred into weeks, and snippets of Linda's new life made their way into the office, the barely filtered anecdotes of newborn pandemonium. Colleagues fawned over the baby photos, still on the other side of the sepia-filtered glass of actuality. But then, as if an unseen seal broke, Linda became a torrent of confessions in hushed tones at the break room coffee pot, narratives unraveling about how unprepared she was, how no amount of puppy chasing prepared her for this engrossing ordeal of restlessness. A slow, creeping spiral of reality gripped her tails, insomniac nights waxing, puppy-like obligations falling apart under the true pressure of nurturing life. Her face became a canvas of sleepless nights, eyes darting, seeking understanding, or maybe forgiveness for apparent assumptions made under party lights. There I was, standing at the fringes with "I told you so" marinating on my tongue, a bitter truth I'd sugar-coated with reserved politeness. The moment arrived when she passed me in the corridor, on the brink of breaking, her smile a quiver delusion. Was it time? Would I be the asshole if I brought up my internal musings, that dim credential of knowledge I'd hoarded? I sat frozen, pondering if it was my chance to finally speak or remain the silent conscience of this real-time consequence. But that question gnawed, the ever-present tickling itch that lingered. A late evening unraveled and found me rested awake, the pretext of going further unchecked. Shadows of self-doubt danced, whispering if repudiating the comparison might have helped mitigate the shock. Engrossed in my bed's silence, it felt like a cold, laughing entity often found in those storied tales, mocking me with flesh-forged reminders of tales gone awry. Scenarios scrolled past, hypothetical judgments embroidering new threads into exhausted garments. Was ignorance blissful after all, for myself and Linda? Should I have dared stitch into the night, wounding illusions early to forestall this drawn-out realization? My conscience was the antagonist of my dilemma, and all I could feel was the unrepentant haunt of that nameless what-if, growing, whispering, festering until sleep was no refuge, my bed an unsettled contraption. Would Linda even recall that party assertion amidst her twilight years of baby giggles and sleep deprivation? The musings of doubt are relics of a bygone night, another sleepless persistence punctuated by an innocent comparison, making me wonder if any warning could have altered this tale at all. Was I the real asshole amid unfolding this nocturne saga, or just another silent participant in the silent symphony of parental revelations faced by many before, the spoken or unspoken sometimes burdening the souls who let it linger, a tacit reminder of what awaits, unstitched and loose? Within the woven strings of experience that we never dared speak of, persisted our truths. I knew them like uneasy lullabies coaxed in echoes of long-gone years, little comfort for those who trotted, blind as Simba's first steps under Mufasa's watchful eyes. And as the chorus of children's waking echoed through the whispers of time, I, the self-doubt-sheathed guardian, allowed myself one final ponderance, a lone candle against the tempest. Am I the asshole? And to what became of those dormant truths, routed through sleepless echoes? We were experienced hikers, a close-knit group bound by our love for the wilderness and the thrill of finding paths untrodden. Our latest expedition was to a secluded range known as Whispering Pines, a place steeped in eerie local legends. We dismissively brushed off the tales told by the old-timers at the base village, superstitions about voices carried on the wind, and shadows that slipped through the trees like living things. The first 2 days were textbook perfect, until the third morning, when Caleb vanished without a trace. It happened so quickly, so surreptitiously, that we initially couldn't believe it. We'd made camp near a pristine lake under the boughs of ancient pines, the air filled with the scent of damp earth and the distant call of a solitary owl. Caleb was always the early riser, the first to stretch his legs, usually back with fresh water and a grin before the rest of us even stirred. But by the time the sun crested the mist, and there was still no sign of him, unease began to settle in. His pack was untouched, coffee unbrewed, habits uncharacteristic of our punctual friend. After calling his name into the silence yielded nothing more than echoes, we split up into pairs to search, trying to stow away the spiraling worry that started to churn in our gut. Tessa and I headed east towards the grove where a stream cut through the woods. Our eyes scanned for broken branches, footprints, anything, but the forest seemed to have swallowed him whole. Meanwhile, Eric and Julie went west, their voices faint and distant. Hours passed, the forest closing in tighter by the minute with a strange oppressive atmosphere engulfing what normally was our playground. The land seemed to shift beneath our feet, familiar landmarks turned strange, paths doubled back on themselves impossibly, and we'd catch fleeting glimpses of movement at the edges of our vision. By the time we regrouped, the sun was low, our nerves taut. Eric was unusually quiet, a shadow crossing his face as if he had caught the scent of something ominous. Julie's attempt at levity was stilted, cracking under tension as she joked weakly that maybe Caleb had just gotten cold feet and headed home. Night fell sharp and sudden, with a chill that had us drawing closer to the fire we'd built out of necessity rather than comfort. Whispering Pines had developed an auditory personality, soft sighs and an occasional haunting rustle that felt unnervingly personal. Just when weariness began to drag at our eyes, an all too familiar voice called out faintly from the woods. Caleb's voice. Relief washed over us, instinctively pulling us to our feet. But Tessa grabbed my arm, halting me with wide eyes. "Listen," she whispered urgently. The eerie note in that familiar call was undeniable. A quiver in the cadence that touched on something old and primal, something we shouldn't have been able to hear. Eric, putting on a brave face, called out, assuring Caleb we would come to get him, but just beyond the ring of firelight, where the trees loomed like great dark sentinels, Caleb's voice echoed again, hollow and wrong. We sat, paralyzed by instinct screaming that something wasn't right, until all at once, the voices stopped, leaving us stranded in deafening silence. Sleep was impossible that night as every creak and crack seemed amplified, each whisper of the branches sounding suspiciously like someone sneaking closer. Hours dripped by agonizingly slow, and by dawn's pallid light, we resolved to retrace our steps back to the village for help. Navigation was inexplicably difficult this time, the forest a labyrinth that delighted in confusion. What trails remained unblocked taunted us with surreal disorientation. We should have reached civilization by midday, yet we only stumbled deeper into this natural maze. Then, on the supposed path home, we found Caleb's compass smashed, reflecting the dull glow of the dismal sky, a chilling homage that rooted us in dread. Desperation clawed at our minds, whispering dark desires of distrust and fear, as if this forest sought to unravel the threads binding us together. The final day blurred into night again, an eternal twilight under the canopy. We clung to each other not out of camaraderie but for fear of becoming the next to vanish. As we huddled together, we debated not just the real horrors of exposure and dehydration, but the lurking terror of Caleb's voice, which now returned, mocking, shifting timber as if trying on skins. Eric, eyes wild with fraying sanity, claimed the trees whispered to him, claimed they knew the paths and the terrible fate that would keep us here. Julie begged him to stay silent, to not acknowledge whatever had taken Caleb, lest it finds us suitable replacements. A storm rolled in after midnight, thunder roaring a twisted lullaby while wind howled through the branches, drowning out even our panicked voices. As lightning illuminated the surroundings, we saw silhouettes within the trees, figures that mirrored those who had gone missing in these woods years before, if village lore was to be believed. Tessa clutched my hand with a grip so fierce it spoke of unvoiced terror, and when dawn arrived again, in hues now tinged with the surreal shift of reality, we stumbled upon a small clearing none of us remembered seeing. There, center-focused in stark contrast to the vibrant grass was Caleb's water bottle, its presence a sinister beacon marking our passage from the known into the inexplicable. We never saw Caleb again. When we reached the village, looking like specters, babbling about what we had endured, dismissive eyes met our desperate tales. They wrapped around us, the comfort of civilization, but could not chase away the creeping realization that those woods wanted something, needed something, and our presence had fed its hunger in a way none of us could articulate. The stories told in whispering tones in the bars and around campfires now held new weight in our hearts, for we had left a piece of our sanity there, among the whispering pines, and it would call us back, in the form of Caleb's voice, until the end of our days. It was just another Saturday evening, and the craving for greasy, cheesy goodness crept over me like a comforting, yet unshakable presence. The neighborhood pizza joint, Tony's Slice of Heaven, was renowned for its Chicago-style deep dish pizzas, and I'd been salivating over the idea of their signature creation all week. At 7 p.m. sharp, I made the call. "Large deep dish, extra cheese, loads of pepperoni," I said, hearing the boredom in the kid's voice who took my order. His monotone confirmation and estimated time for delivery seemed off, 45 minutes instead of 15, suspicious for a place 5 minutes down the road. Time dragged heavily as I waited, stomach growling, mind daydreaming about the perfect blend of flavors and textures. The delivery was late, of course, an hour and a half late. It's hard to express the kind of hunger rage you develop when you start at very hungry and end up starving while just waiting. When the doorbell finally rang, I didn't care to check the peephole, assuming it was the teenage delivery driver, apologies rehearsed and payment calculator ready. Instead, I opened the door to a void of silence with no one in sight, until a box was slowly pushed through the entrance. At first, I thought it was a prank until I noticed a dank smell wafting from the dark hall. It didn't smell like food, more like wet earth. Phone flashlight in hand, I peeked into the hallway. No one. My building's corridor was empty, the lights flickering as if protesting their exposure to someone, or something, unexpected. I quickly closed the door, rationalizing it was just a joke, after all, a tired delivery boy pulling a fast one on hangry customers. Immersed in pizza fantasy, I returned to the box, opened it, and recoiled at the sight. The pizza was there, kind of. It seemed raw and lived in, bearing an odd consistency that could only be credited to neglect or sabotage. There, right in the middle of the coagulated cheese, sprawled a peculiar symbol etched in marinara, like some cryptic calling card. I tried to look closer, neglecting my initial revulsion. I should have known better. Each string of cheese lifted, each bite taken, felt off, otherworldly. It coated my insides with a queasiness that wasn't purely physical. Ignoring my instincts, I kept eating, hating myself and loving every illicit bite. Minutes later, a sharp knock interrupted my meal. It was a man, sweating, eyes wide open as if they'd seen too much. "You didn't pay," he panted. "You ordered, but you forgot." I fumbled incoherently for an apology and a tip out of habit, thrusting a handful of change at him. Oddly, a single nickel and 5 pennies were jammed into my palm. It felt innumerably rude and disproportionate for a $70 bill. His eyes, dark and sunken, peered into mine, devoid of forgiving, just two vast, emotionless pits. He accepted the coins and left, grumbling words I couldn't comprehend but felt immediately fearful of. As soon as he staggered out of my line of sight, the walls creaked, the shadows stretched ominously, and a pressure built in my chest like something wanted out. Then the apartment was cold, Dallas midsummer kind of cold, and I shivered uncontrollably. I thought I heard scratching, subtle at first, almost blending with the wind that crept through the cracks of the old walls, but soon it became a cacophony of skittering, clawing against imagined surfaces. The walls seemed to breathe in rhythm with my escalating panic. Before long, whispers echoed from the corners, guttural and foreign, taunting me in dialects I couldn't marry to earth. Was it the pizza? Something buried deep bobbed to the surface, a clip from a late-night paranormal show about symbols, demonic omens, and possession. No, it couldn't be that. I, a tired bachelor of minimal ambition and maximum sloth, didn't dabble in the arcane. My life was defined by meals like these, nights like this, normal, mundane. But something was wrong. The reflection in the window wasn't me, its grin too broad, skin too pallid. The world outside was undergoing transformations I couldn't account for. I swear the air got thick with the taste of pepperoni and malice. I was overwhelmed by an outrageous sense of danger, as if some pizza-related grievance awoke an ancient malevolence now seeking compensation I couldn't afford. Numbed by unimaginable paranoia, I dared not sleep. Instead, I sat, the half-eaten slice of pizza mocking me from the box like a guilty trap. It felt like a war against self-inflicted madness, my mind weaving tales of guilt and apocalypse over a neglected tip. I spent the rest of the night huddled, eyeing the doorway, waiting for the world to resolve itself, convinced that any moment, the Shadow Man would return, claiming debts unpaid, a soul's return in kind for a 10-cent tip. It all started with my niece Bella, a bright and imaginative 5-year-old who had an uncanny knack for envisioning things that often sent chills down my spine. I remember it clearly, the night Bella sat cross-legged on the living room floor as we embarked on a quiet evening of board games. Her parents, my sister and brother-in-law, were enjoying a rare night out, blissfully unaware of the eerie events that were about to unfold in their absence. As we pretended to race our pawns to the finish line, Bella paused, her eyes transfixed on something just beyond where I sat, her face pale against the dim glow of the lamp. "Andy, they're watching us," she whispered, barely audible, her voice quivering with an unsettling certainty. I followed her gaze to the darkened corner of the room, expecting to see reflections or shadows cast as tricks of my imagination, but there was nothing, or perhaps something that only Bella could perceive. I laughed it off, attributing her comment to the vivid imaginings of a child, but an inward shiver made my skin prickle. As the clock ticked past 10, Bella grew increasingly restless, insisting that we close the curtains and turn off all the lights. "They don't like the lights," she explained with an unnerving clarity, as if this were a universal truth everyone should accept. Reluctantly, I complied, more to ease her worries than due to a belief in her unseen observers. However, the encroaching darkness only heightened my unease. With the room now engulfed in shadows, Bella sat silently, eyes wide, as if listening to a conversation from elsewhere, a place only she could reach. "They say it's almost time," she murmured finally, her words hanging thick in the air. A chill rolled down my spine as our seemingly empty home creaked inside, settling in a manner that felt almost sentient, a subtle protest to the unfamiliar presence Bella seemed so attuned to. Was it the house groaning under the weight of my growing fear, or was Bella's awareness of the they in the darkness squeezing a response from its very foundations? Now fully on edge, and unable to shake the sensation of being watched, I proposed that we read a bedtime story, hoping that the comforting act would lull Bella, and me, into abandoning these unsettling thoughts. As I flipped through the pages of her favorite fairy tale, Bella interrupted, her small hand slapping against the illustrations with surprising force. "Not this story," she exclaimed, her eyes filled with an intensity that made me reconsider my dismissal of her earlier claims. "They don't like this one. It makes them angry." The statement slammed into my chest like a punch, knocking the air from my lungs. An inexplicable static seemed to charge the room, buzzing and vibrating just beneath the surface of reality, a tremor only Bella and I could feel. I couldn't shake the building pressure of the silence that seemed to press in on us from all sides. Desperation clawed at me to reinstate some semblance of normality, yet my words faltered. "Who are they, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to sound calm, yearning for some logical explanation. Bella looked at me then, her eyes now reflective pools, far too ancient for her young face. "They are the ones who know," she whispered, and it was as if the air itself was holding its breath. With no further ceremony, she climbed off the couch, padding softly to the window where the curtains hung like sentries guarding a world just beyond, one that was foreign to me but familiar to her. Peeking through a tiny gap in the fabric, she smiled, a singular glimmer of mischief and conspiracy. "They're here," she announced, beckoning me to witness what she saw. I hesitated, the weight of Bella's statement pressing down on me, pushing the boundaries of reality as I knew it. My mind screamed to retreat, to protect us both, but something intangible, call it curiosity or folly, made me follow. Together we peered through the crack, and the world outside seemed unchanged, peacefully normal, unchanged night. Yet Bella's fingers tapped against the glass in a savant's Morse code, as if she were communicating in a language unspoken and unknown to me. I wanted reassurance, some definitive proof that all was well, but a voice, softer than a whisper yet louder than my thoughts, murmured warnings of ancient truths and veiled eyes hidden by shadows. The street remained ominously still, absent of activity save for the occasional flicker of a passing car's headlights. It wasn't until then that I realized what had been bothering me all night. The neighborhood was silent, utterly devoid of the typical cricket songs or distant hum of late-night televisions. Instead, it was as though the world itself was listening, awaiting whatever revelation Bella was prepared to unveil. I didn't have to wait long. Bella turned to me, eyes wide with a combination of innocence and wisdom that I could never fathom. "There's something beyond the here and now, a place and a knowing that only I can see," she said, each word a dagger that flayed the skepticism from my convictions. "When they come, it changes everything. They reveal the truths you've forgotten, the stories lost to time." Her words lingered in the air, a foreshadowing more tangible than the darkness surrounding us. It was at that moment I understood. Bella perceived the world through lenses I couldn't begin to comprehend, lenses that allowed her to connect unseen dots and resurrect stories buried deep within the echo of our existence. My phone buzzed suddenly, the jarring interruption a lifeline that pulled me back from whatever abyss Bella's words had opened beneath my feet. It was a message from my sister, confirming their imminent return. But as Bella's enigmatic smile broadened, I knew our lives were now woven with the eternal and the unknowable, A fabric threaded by whispers and shadows. Bella had shown me the edge of a vastness I couldn't retreat from, her simple acknowledgement of the mysteries cloaked in the mundane forever altering my perception. As her parents' car pulled into the driveway, casting elongated shadows across the lawn, Bella's fingers intertwined with mine, a silent promise of shared secrets as we watched the delicate dance of light and dark play out beyond the sanctuary of our small, understanding worlds. The night expanded around us, thick with unsolved enigmas, and I knew, deep in my bones, that Bella had indeed shared something known only to the watchers beyond the veil, a hidden knowledge that would haunt and captivate me forever. When I first heard we were getting a new substitute teacher, I didn't think much of it. Teachers came and went, and we students just rolled with the punches. But the day Ms. Alaric walked into our 7th grade classroom was the day everything changed. She had an ethereal, commanding presence, tall, with jet black hair that fell in sleek waves past her shoulders, and piercing green eyes that seemed to see right through you. There was something otherworldly about her, as if she belonged in another century, maybe even another realm. Her voice was a soft, melodic whisper that somehow carried across the room, compelling everyone to stop mid-sentence the moment she started speaking. Ms. Alaric wasted no time in taking charge of the classroom, effortlessly gaining control with an air of authority that made even the rowdiest kids fall silent. From the first lesson, things were strange. As we opened our books, she told us that today we were going to explore history in a manner far different than we were used to. Forget the dates and battles, she insisted with a mischievous smile, we're going to time travel into the souls and emotions of the past. At first, we exchanged skeptical glances. Time travel? Surely not. But as she began to speak, weaving stories with such vivid imagery that the classroom seemed to swirl with colors and echoes of distant lives, a curious, almost unreal energy filled the room. I felt a jolt of fear when she directed her gaze at me, demanding I tell her what I saw beyond the dusty old facts. Suddenly, I was no longer in the classroom. I was standing in the midst of a medieval village, the air thick with the smell of soot and the chilling wails of something I couldn't quite put a finger on. Others in the room began gasping and whispering about their own startling visions. A girl named Tracy swore she could hear voices speaking in languages she had never learned, and even Kevin, who usually prided himself on being the class clown, sat wide-eyed and speechless. We returned from that peculiar lesson restless and curious, but something about the experience left me feeling heavy, like I carried a part of it back with me, something ancient clinging to my skin. The next day, things escalated. Ms. Alaric didn't follow the school syllabus, instead, she seemed to craft her lessons from an eerie compendium no one else had access to, but we couldn't look away. Her eyes would flicker with strange light when she lectured, and her words seemed to summon events as if she were reciting spells from a forgotten book of lore. Whispers about Ms. Alaric spread through the school. Some said she was a witch, others a ghost haunting the classrooms, looking for redemption or revenge. A rumor began about a substitute teacher decades ago who vanished mysteriously, and her description eerily matched Ms. Alaric's appearance, fueling theories that she had returned, although no one knew why or how. As I dug deeper, I stumbled across a dusty yearbook in the library's archives, confirming the existence of a Ms. Alaric from the 1920s, who mysteriously disappeared. The photograph was unnerving, her expression eerily identical to the one she wore now, yet it couldn't be the same woman, could it? At home, I couldn't escape the lingering presence of her lessons. My dreams were riddled with vivid nightmares of eras I had never studied but somehow knew intimately. My friends experienced similar disturbances, finding strange symbols etched into their notebooks without recollection of writing them. A few classmates even transferred out of sheer terror, but for some inexplicable reason, something kept me tethered to her and the strange, intoxicating allure of her classes. One evening, I overheard my parents talking about the recent changes they noticed in me and feared they'd soon seek counsel from mental health professionals. I knew I had to get to the bottom of Ms. Alaric's secret. Determined, I ventured into school after dusk. The corridors, which by day were filled with laughter and rushed footsteps, now echoed with shadows that seemed to dance with malicious intent under the dim emergency lights. I made my way to our classroom, feeling a pull toward Ms. Alaric's desk. My fingers trembled slightly as they traced the edges of something underneath, an old, dusty book bound in a type of leather that felt unsettlingly warm. The pages seemed to flutter of their own volition, revealing scrawls in an indecipherable script, save for symbols that mirrored the ones etched in my dreams. Just then, a cold breeze encircled the room despite the closed windows, and I heard her voice, deeper, resonating against the walls. "You've opened the way," she said, materializing from the shadows. My heart pounded as I stood frozen, caught between fear and an emergent understanding I couldn't yet articulate. She confessed her true nature, an eternal guide bound to a cycle of teaching and learning through the ages, drawing power and wisdom from the students who interacted with her, recycling souls like stories told and retold through time. This revelation struck hard, yet somehow I understood, I was always meant to partake in this strange dance outside time itself. A choice lay before me: accept the transfer of ancient wisdom and continue my life as part of this incomprehensible continuum, or walk away, leaving these truths and the burden of knowledge behind. I hesitated, grappling with the weight of such a decision. Ms. Alaric's eyes softened, offering an eternity of paths yet to be tread and stories untold. Suddenly, back in my bed, I awoke with a start, heart racing and unsure. Had it all been some wild dream, a machination of overactive imagination? Returning to school, Ms. Alaric was gone, replaced by another ordinary sub who followed the curriculum to the letter, her presence entirely forgettable. The visions faded, leaving behind a lingering, melancholic desire for something greater. Yet, every so often, I'd catch a fleeting shadow or hear the distant echo of her voice in history class, and I'd remember. The others seemed to forget quickly, as if brushing off a bad dream, but not me. This indescribable connection, this bind to the spectral presence of Ms. Alaric, stayed within me, as did the silent understanding that we are all but custodians of the stories that come before us, waiting to be awakened by the right whisperer.